Welcome back to the Who's Yanks. Be the Who's Yanks. We're talking Canada soccer and U.S. soccer. Today we're going to be talking about a recap on the U.S. Open Cup draw that just finished up in South Florida, I believe in Miami. And I'm going to be talking about my emotions with it, as well as we're going to be highlighting the matchups that are coming over in May 9th to the 10th, or from May 10th to 11th, I believe. And then there's going to be a short round of 16 draw on the 12th after all the dust settles. But nonetheless, to start with my opening thoughts before I get into the games, initial reaction from the draw is really. I know that there's a certain way that it's formatted, and a certain way that it has to be in order with the given teams that are there. Like for instance, the 8 MLS teams that already were waiting in the round of 32 to be drawn couldn't be put into the same group. So, for instance, Seattle Sounders and Portland couldn't be put into the same group despite having regional close, or despite being close regionally. But which is why we'll see Philadelphia Union and or in some of the oddball groups like in Florida or in the South, which is it's weird, but it kind of does make sense thinking about it, as it's kind of like a World Cup. You can't have multiple pot one teams in one group, right? So it makes sense. So unfortunately, that means that if we are going to have a Seattle versus Portland matchup, or if anything of that caliber, it's going to have to wait until further down the line. But yeah, nonetheless, overall, my thoughts on it, it was an interesting draw. I'm really sad that we didn't get some of the marquee rivalry matchups right away. But then again, I mean, I already knew that was too good to be true. For instance, we weren't going to get the Hudson River Derby, New York City versus New York Red Bulls, in the round of 32, because that would have been too soon, I guess. Just like we didn't have the Florida Derby, Inter Miami versus Orlando, the El Tráfico, we didn't have that. Not even El Clásico, the California Clásico, San Jose and LA Galaxy. Not even that, as the San Jose Earthquakes are even in a different group, so that's not even possible yet, unless both teams advance to the round of 16. What other mark? We didn't have the Texas rivalry between Houston and Dallas, but we do have War the King and the Queen of the South, Charlotte versus Atlanta rivalry. But we do have one rivalry that I'm glad that it does make for a good match, and it is going to be Nashville versus Atlanta. Nashville will be hosting, hopefully in their brand new stadium, as Atlanta couldn't host because their stadium requirements didn't meet them. But nonetheless, Nashville will be hosting Atlanta, hopefully in a brand new stadium, because I believe their stadium opens on May 1st or early May. So there will probably be the third match overall that will be played in the stadium, if not during midweek games. But nonetheless, Nashville versus Atlanta should be hosted in that brand new stadium. So bright side is you do get to see a new stadium being played in, as well as a regional rivalry, despite them playing in different conferences in the MLS. It does restore an old rivalry between Nashville and Atlanta, and this is a rivalry that, I mean, it's one of the only rivalries and matchups I'm looking forward to. But nonetheless, really looking forward to see how things go between those two teams. But that was my initial thought. So there are barely any rivalries here. There's only one that I can think of. And there's also less MLS versus USL. It's more so USL versus USL, MLS versus MLS. So, if anything, it's more league on league action than interleague play. So that's another thing. There are a few games like Tormenta and Inter Miami, which is going to be part of the first group we're going to cover, but it's less USL versus, or David versus Goliath, and more equal matchups, which on the bright side, it can make for good marquee games and entertaining games, close matches, depending on how these teams play their lineups. But at the same time, the storyline for David and Goliath is less there. I mean, Houston and San Antonio, that is kind of another rivalry, just like San Antonio and Austin, that can be played between a David and Goliath. So that one I'm looking forward to. But nonetheless, it's more so just generic MLS midweek matchups. But without further ado, let me go ahead and start breaking down these groups. There's 8 groups, 8 regions, and I'm going to be going the reverse direction that the U.S. Open Cup did. Instead of going from northeast to south, Atlantic. We'll be going from South Atlantic to Northeast. So, starting off with the Southern Atlantic, Orlando City, Philadelphia Union are your teams that will be playing in each other. Um, Orlando City hosting, and Philadelphia Union will be visiting. MLS on MLS action. Um, Hopefully it'll be a good game, but I'm looking forward to just seeing how I really, really want to see a Florida derby here, especially given how Orlando and Miami really are in this group. Philadelphia Union are in this group too, but um, they're going to be visiting, so we'll see about that. And yeah, but nonetheless, Inter Miami and Tormenta from South Georgia. Um, Once again, Inter Miami hosting, so both Florida teams are hosting, but it's this one is MLS versus USL one League One, so it is MLS on David and Goliath. David and Goliath. We'll see. This is more of an equal matchup though for Inter Miami, as I believe Tormenta could actually spring a shocker against Inter Miami, as Inter Miami narrowly escaped their counterpart in the USL, Miami FC, or oh yeah, I believe it's Miami SC. But now they play Tormenta, so maybe this might be a more equal matchup for Inter Miami, but we'll see how they play this one. But nonetheless, we all know that I'm hoping for a rivalry here between Orlando advances and Inter Miami. But then again, there will be another draw. So in the round of 16, if Atlanta advances, if Charlotte advances, Orlando City and Inter Miami advance, we couldn't have any. We still could have no rivalries. So I mean, this is how the format is. So we're not guaranteed regional rivalries despite having regional matchups, which it's interesting. But hey, I don't make the rules. I just judge the shots. And from what I see on here on paper, Orlando versus Philly for match one, and then or match it'll be one of the latter matches probably, and then Inter Miami versus Tormenta for probably one of the last matches of the tournament. Hopefully these games are not concurrent, and hopefully I'll be able to watch more at time with half screens, at least dual screens, rather than having to sacrifice games. But we'll see how the whole scheduling format. It's going to come out later today on U.S. Soccer, so we'll see how that all schedules down. But nonetheless, I'm hoping for, hoping for a good matchup here. And so yeah, that's Region 1, or your Southern Atlantic region. We move on to the South Central region now, your Texas region. So you have Houston versus San Antonio, pretty good matchup, MLS versus USL, and then Sporting KC hosting FC Dallas. So no Houston-Dallas rivalry, but there is in Houston-San Antonio little rivalry, regional rivalry between, and Davis-Goliath battle. So that one should be an interesting game here. And really looking forward to see how San Antonio, after knocking off Austin FC, puts up a good fight against the Houston Dynamo. And really, really looking forward to that, see how they play. But nonetheless, there will be no I-45 derby, no Texas derby for this one yet, maybe. As I said, if both teams advance, then again, Sporting KC is hosting, and that's a pretty tough opponent. But if both teams advance, they're still not guaranteed, by the format of the tournament, still not guaranteed a rival matchup, as they're going to be put into the draw of 16, and they could be matched up with other rivals. So we just got to wait and see how that all works out and shakes out. But Houston Dynamo at San Antonio, I'm really looking forward to that one. San Antonio, can they keep their good streak going? This time they'll travel to Houston, just a short trip across I-10 and to the biggest city in Texas. Houston Dynamo, maybe they can fill out their stadium for this one, but we just got to keep an eye out for that. And Sporting KC hosting FC Dallas. Nonetheless, FC Dallas and Ricardo Pepi will have to travel north to Kansas City. We'll see how that works out for them, but it should be pretty good matches. We got MLS on MLS, and then MLS versus USL. San Antonio proved their worth again. That's your South Central region. Then your round of 32 games, your South Pacific, or Southern Pacific, I should say. LAFC versus the Portland Timbers. MLS on MLS action here, and then California United Strikers hosting the LA Galaxy of the NISA hosting the NMLS. Once again, no LAFC versus LA Galaxy matchup here. It would have been too good to be true, just like any other rivalry matchup, I guess. But maybe if these teams can advance, we'll have something good in the future. But it's LA Galaxy going to California United Strikers. We'll see how that one goes. That is David and Goliath, MLS versus NISA. LA Galaxy put a pretty good performance against San Diego Loyal, only winning that one 1-0. They were down in the first half, but the second half, San Diego Loyal showed a little resistance. We'll see how they go when they have to travel to California United, and then LAFC hosting Timbers in the Bank of California Stadium. It's kind of a rematch of 2019 as LAFC beat the Timbers 3-2 in Bank California Stadium. So once again, LAFC is hosting the Portland Timbers. And as I said earlier on, Timbers being in this group because they couldn't be in the same group as Seattle was already one of the 8 teams through. So that means there was no chance yet for a regional rivalry between Portland and the Cascadia rivalry matchup. So that'll have to wait should both teams advance, but there is no El Tráfico battle yet. So there's only, as I said, there's really no notable rivalries yet other than Nashville and Atlanta. But hold out, yeah, it could happen soon. But pretty good games here. We'll see how LA Galaxy performs against the California United Strikers as well as LAFC hosting Timbers. So that's your Southern Pacific. Then we move to the Northern Pacific. You have your Sacramento Republic of the USL versus their Phoenix Rising of the USL. So USLSC versus USLSC. So championship, both teams playing each other. And your Sounders versus your San Jose Earthquakes. MLS on MLS action. So more league on league action here. Sacramento Republic versus Phoenix Rising. That'll probably be a good game. And then kind of your typical midweek game between your Sounders and your San Jose Earthquakes. As well as your typical Western Conference game. So pretty good matchup there. As I said, there were really no regional rivalries here other than potentially NorCal between Sacramento and San Jose. But that didn't happen. And I don't know how it could, being on the schedule, that's probably one less game I have to live stream, given how I'm just judging MLS action here, as well as I'll talk about the USL if they happen or any other teams. But for the sake of this, I'm just seeing how MLS teams perform in this tournament. But nonetheless, the Sounders versus San Jose Earthquakes, a typical midweek game here, and pretty interesting, tasty matchup for your Northern Pacific. Then we move to your Northern Central. You have Union Omaha hosting Hellstorm, Northern Colorado. Once again, USL versus USL, league on league action. And then Minnesota United hosting your Colorado Rapids. More MLS on MLS action. That Union Omaha NorCal game will probably be fireworks. But Minnesota United hosting Colorado. Once again, Colorado, one of the 8 teams coming in this one late. But Minnesota United hosting at Allianz Field. This would be an interesting lineup or interesting game, depending on how Minnesota United will play after beating their other Wisconsin forward Madison, their cross-border interdivisional rival, I guess. But nonetheless, Minnesota United hosting Colorado Rapids. We'll see how that one is for a little midweek MLS action. West Coast as well. So, good thing is a lot of these do appear to be West Coast midweek rise-ups matchups. So, we'll see how they go. Minnesota versus Colorado. Minnesota would go back to their 2019 run against Atlanta United. They lost in the final, but they ultimately made the championship round. And could they do this again? Although they have Colorado Rapids standing in the way. But rumor has it that Colorado Rapids has historically not been decent in the U.S. Open Cup. But they could always change the script as things can happen in this tournament. But for sure, in terms of USL matchup, that Union Omaha versus Hellstorm game should be a tasty one. And then we move to your East Central Division. Your New England is once again MLS on MLS action. New England Revolution versus FC Cincinnati. And then Detroit City versus Louisville City of USL. So once again, we have USL Championship on USL Championship and MLS on MLS. As I said, now you guys see what I'm saying, where there's more divisional rival it's more league matchups and interleague matchups. And New England Revolution traveling to Cincinnati. This is going to be a tough one for FC Cincy, as we know that FC Cincy has really struggled overall recently, but they're looking to break the streak with an MLS opponent. They struggled with MLS opponents, so If anything for FC Cincy, I don't know if it was out of the best interest to get Detroit City or Louisville City. As New England Revolution, I mean, they've been struggling too, but they recently got a win and they bounced back against Charlotte FC. So we'll see if they can keep that look going for them. But for MLS, that'll be a tasty matchups. Both teams are struggling relatively, and we'll see how they do that in a midweek matchup. And especially some tired legs, given how there'll be games played on both ends of the weekends on that week. But nonetheless, that Detroit City versus Louisville City. Can Detroit City continue to make some noise in this tournament? Louisville City, obviously probably one of the favorites, but Detroit City quickly showing the league why they can probably make some noise and why you shouldn't sleep on Detroit. So Detroit City also hosting that one, that brilliant atmosphere. Louisville City will have to travel, but given how it's a familiar foe in their league, we'll see how these two teams match up. But nonetheless, that's your East Central Division. Then we go to your South. You got Nashville versus Atlanta United. This is the regional rivalry matchup between MLS I was talking about. Of course, in actual MLS, it's East versus West as Nashville moved to the Western Conference. But all geographically, it is a regional rivalry. Nashville and Atlanta United. Atlanta United unable to host. So as I said, Nashville SC hosting, hopefully in their brand new stadium as we can watch. And Atlanta United, I mean, a familiar foe. I believe this was their first ever matchup that was hosted in Nashville too, between these two teams on the first game of the season. So kind of renewing a familiar foe, a familiar rivalry matchup. So with this one, so I'm really looking forward for this one. This is probably one of the games I'm looking forward to the most after this one. Nashville and Atlanta. But then you got your Richmond Kickers and Charlotte FC. I kind of predict this one yesterday, given how even though it's a draw, it's probably the most logical for regional rivalries. Probably the Nashville and Atlanta to an extent too. I kind of predicted, but Charlotte FC and Richmond, they're kind of geographically close, so you've got to kind of own that whole southeast region if you're Charlotte. And once again, it's finally David versus Goliath, USL versus MLS league action. Once again, Charlotte will be the visiting team, and we saw they struggled in South Carolina. Greenville Triumph putting up a dogfight yesterday night against Charlotte, but Charlotte ultimately squeaking out the late goal. This time they will travel to Richmond, Virginia to take on the Richmond Kickers. This should be a fun one, and we'll see how the new MLS team fares. And once again, they have another USL matchup team. And should they advance, the old name will get put into the round of 16 draw. So this is not a consistent tournament yet, as there's going to be one last draw in the round of 16, but we'll see how that is when we get closer to May 12th. But we'll see how Charlotte FC does in they've been awarded another non-MLS opponent. So we'll see how that does. And the final group I want to talk about is your Northern Atlantic. NYCFC hosting your Rochester, New York Football Club. MLS versus MLS MP. So I believe that's third division. NYCFC is, once again, there's no Hudson River Derby yet. I mean, it still could happen, but then again, we have DC United hosting the Red Bull, so we do have an I-95 Derby matchup between DC United and New York Red Bulls. And New York City, we do have an all-New York matchup, technically. New York City FC out of New York City, and then Rochester out of upstate New York. So upstate versus downstate. We do have a good matchup here. New York City FC been awarded, once again, a non-MLS foe. But we see, maybe go back to their New York Cosmo run where they struggled and they got knocked out by the New York Cosmos. So anything can happen in this tournament, and we'll see how New York City FC, my favorite American club, does against the Rochester, New York Football Club, who won in penalty shootouts against the New Jersey Motown FC. So that game is pretty good. I'm going to be looking at that one as well. That'll probably be one of the first matchups that will happen, as this group is probably drawn first. I don't know how that's all decided. As I said, U.S. Soccer will decide times, dates, and matchups later on today. But nonetheless, DC United hosting the Red Bulls. This is, as I said, one of the few regional rivalries in this one. I-95 is also a historical MLS rivalry between this one. So nonetheless, this one should be a fun matchup. But MLS on MLS action. One of these teams the names will be put into the draw of round of 16, and we'll see how this fares up. But nonetheless, I think that that does it for your U.S. Open Cup draw analysis and recap. As I said, I'm a little bummed that there's very few regional rivalries matched up in this one, and as well as very few MLS on David Goliath, MLS on lower MLS clubs. We just have more so generic MLS midweek games, which I mean, it's decent, but I'll take it. I mean, it's the U.S. Open Cup, and anything can happen in this one. It's not going to be your hopefully it's not going to be your typical MLS midweek matchups, fingers and toes crossed. Hopefully we have entertaining games, but and hopefully these games are not concurrent or less of concurrent. Although there's a lot, there's 16 games on one day, or 16 teams on one day. So I believe 8 games on one day, and then another 8 on the other day, on the next day. So maybe some will be concurrent, but there's also some more due to the fact that there's more lower league on lower league competition. Um, Means that I could probably have more time for dual screening and less trying to watch 3 games at once, or just maybe even more single screen. But we'll see how that all comes out in the scheduling. Once again, U.S. Soccer. We'll finalize the details later on the day. But without that, that does it for your Lamar Hutt U.S. Open Cup draw analysis, round of 32. And once again, I believe those dates will happen on May 10th and 11th, where those matchups will occur. And then the round of 16 draw, there will be another video on analyzing that on May 12th. And we'll see how that, as well as videos on May 10th and 11th on game recaps for MLS sites. But nonetheless, that does it. If you like this video, make sure you like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about it. Also tell your friends to remember to hit the bell notification that we know when the videos uploaded or posted. And yeah, tell all your friends. We have a round of 32 matchups been decided by the U.S. Open Cup.